The air was cold that evening, the kind of cold that made the trees whisper as the wind moved through their branches. A small fire burned outside a lonely wooden cabin on the edge of a wide, empty field. The flames flickered softly, throwing long shadows across the ground. Near the fire sat a widow named Mara, a quiet woman who had lived more years with sadness than with joy. Her life had been heavy ever since her husband passed away 2 winters ago. Even though time continued to move forward, her heart felt stuck in the same painful moment. Every evening, Mara sat by the fire because it reminded her of the nights she and her husband used to spend together. They would sit outside, drink warm tea, and talk about everything and nothing. It had been simple, but it had been enough. Now the firelight only showed her empty spaces. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the wind brushed against her face. She had tried many times to live normally again, to smile without forcing it, to work without feeling tired deep in her soul. But grief wasn't something she could escape. It followed her everywhere like a shadow. That night she thought she would sit alone, just like every night. But life often surprises people exactly when they stop expecting anything. From the distance, she heard the steady sound of hooves on dirt, slow, careful, and unfamiliar. Mara turned her head slightly, though she did not stand up. She was used to travelers passing by, but they rarely stopped near her home. Most people knew this land belonged to quiet folks who preferred peace, but this traveler didn't seem to be simply passing. Moments later, a tall cowboy rode into the soft glow of the fire. His horse was dusty from a long journey, and he carried a small bag tied behind the saddle. The cowboy looked strong, but not harsh. His eyes were calm, the kind that came from living a life filled with both storms and sunshine. His clothes were worn from travel, but clean enough to show he respected himself. He slowed his horse and gave a polite nod. "Evening, ma'am," he said in a steady voice. "Didn't mean to startle you?" Mara stared at him carefully. She wasn't afraid, only cautious. "Evening," she replied softly. Her voice carried the weight of someone who spoke rarely. "I'm looking for a place to rest for the night," the cowboy continued. "I saw the fire and thought maybe there was someone around to ask." Mara hesitated. She had lived alone long enough to guard her space. But something about his presence felt honest. Not pushy, not demanding, just a man traveling and looking for shelter. "There's an old shed behind the cabin," she said after a moment. "It's not much, but it can keep the wind away." "That'd be more than enough," he answered gratefully. "Thank you, ma'am." He climbed off his horse and began to walk toward the shed, but after a few steps, he paused and turned back. "Would it trouble you if I warm my hands by your fire for a minute?" he asked gently. Mara looked at the flames, then at him. The night felt colder than usual, and perhaps she didn't mind a little company, just for a moment. "You can sit," she said quietly. The cowboy took a seat on the other side of the fire, giving her plenty of space. He didn't rush into conversation. He simply warmed his hands and watched the flames dance. Mara appreciated that. She was tired of people who felt the need to fill silence with noise. Silence, to her, was comforting. It didn't ask anything from her. After a while, the cowboy spoke again. "My name's Colt," he said in a calm tone. "Been riding for a few days. Work's taken me from one ranch to the next." Mara nodded, though she didn't introduce herself right away. It wasn't because she wanted to be rude. She just wasn't used to talking. Colt didn't seem bothered. He stayed patient, letting the night settle around them. When he finally spoke again, it was with genuine interest. "This your land?" he asked gently, not prying, just curious. "Yes," she replied. "My husband built this place." There was a small pause. "He's gone now." Colt lowered his gaze respectfully. "I'm sorry for your loss." Mara didn't respond. She wasn't sure if she believed people meant those words anymore, but Colt didn't say anything else. He didn't push for details or try to comfort her with empty phrases. He simply let the moment breathe. The fire crackled softly between them. After a while, Mara spoke without realizing she was going to. "I don't usually have visitors." "I can see why," Colt said with a small, understanding smile. "It's quiet out here, peaceful." "It used to feel peaceful," she replied. "Now it just feels empty." Colt listened with focus. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix her. He just listened, which was something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Most people avoided talking to someone who carried sadness. They didn't know what to say, so they stayed away. But this cowboy didn't seem afraid of grief. "You're strong to stay here by yourself," he said softly. Mara shook her head. "I'm not strong. I just don't know where else to go." "Sometimes staying is harder than leaving," Colt answered. "Takes strength either way." For the first time in months, Mara felt a small softness inside her chest, a tiny warmth that wasn't from the fire. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was something close. She looked at Colt a little longer this time. His face was calm, honest, like someone who had seen enough of life to understand pain without judgment. She wondered what kind of losses he carried. Everyone had something. The wind blew harder as the night deepened, and Mara stood slowly, her joints stiff from sitting too long. Colt watched her carefully, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that showed he was ready to offer help if she needed it. "You should rest," Mara said. "The shed isn't far." Colt nodded and stood as well. "Thank you again, ma'am, for the fire and the kindness." Mara didn't know how to respond to that. Kindness wasn't something she felt she had much of left inside her, but maybe she had a little more than she realized. Before leaving, Colt gave one more polite nod, then walked toward the shed with his horse. Mara stood by the fire, watching his silhouette disappear into the shadows. She didn't know why, but she felt something shift inside her, something small but real. The night no longer felt as cold. The wind no longer felt as sharp. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone, and she didn't understand it yet. But Colt's arrival would become the start of something she never expected, something that would slowly bring light back into a heart that had lived too long in darkness. She turned back to the fire, pulled her shawl tighter, and let the warmth touch her face. A new chapter had stepped into her quiet world, and though she didn't know where it would lead, she felt a strange sense of hope. A soft, gentle hope, quiet like the firelight, but warm enough to feel. The next morning came slowly, with soft sunlight spreading across the fields like a quiet blessing. Mara woke before the sun fully rose, just as she always did. Her days began early because work did not wait for grief to fade. She stepped outside and breathed in the cool morning air. The fire from last night had burned down to gentle ashes, still warm but no longer glowing. For a moment, Mara wondered if she had dreamed the cowboy's arrival. The night had felt unusually heavy, yet strangely comforting. She stepped toward the shed to make sure she hadn't imagined everything. The sight of Colt's horse tied to a post confirmed it. He was still here. As she approached the shed, she heard soft movement inside. Colt stepped out, looking rested but ready for the day. His hat was in his hand, and his hair was slightly messy, evidence of a night spent in simple shelter. But his expression was calm, almost peaceful. "Morning, ma'am," he said with that same steady voice. "Morning," Mara replied, her tone gentle. Colt stretched lightly and glanced toward the field. "You got a nice place here. Quiet, but in a good way." Mara didn't know what to say. Compliments about her home always made her uncertain. It was a place filled with memories, both warm and painful. "You need water for your horse?" she finally asked. "If it's not too much trouble," Colt said. "Not trouble," she replied, leading him to the small trough by the side of the house. While Colt let his horse drink, Mara stood a few steps back, studying him quietly. There was something steady about him, something that didn't feel like a storm, but more like a shelter. She wasn't used to that feeling anymore. "You're traveling far?" she asked after a moment. "Yes, ma'am," Colt said. "Work mostly. Some ranches need help with their cattle. I move wherever I'm needed." "That must be a hard life. Always moving." Colt shrugged with a soft smile. "It has its moments. Sometimes the road is lonely, but it also teaches you things." "What kind of things?" Mara asked. Colt took a moment before answering. "Teaches you how to be patient. Teaches you how to keep going even when you're tired. Teaches you to notice small kindness when it appears." Mara lowered her gaze, unsure why she felt her chest warm slightly at his words. "You don't talk like someone who's always on the road," she said softly. He laughed, a light, sincere sound. "Don't know if that's a good thing or bad." "It's good," she said quietly. The cowboy looked at her for a slow moment, as if trying to understand something about her that she didn't say out loud. But he didn't ask questions. He respected her silence. After a while, Colt offered to help with morning chores. Mara refused at first, out of habit. She had done everything alone for so long that letting someone else lift even a small burden felt strange. But Colt insisted kindly. "Please, ma'am, you gave me a place to rest. Let me return the kindness." His tone was gentle, not forceful. Mara finally nodded, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "All right." They worked quietly together in the fields. Mara collected eggs from the hens, and Colt fixed a loose board on the chicken coop. He moved with confidence, the way someone does when they've repaired things 100 times before. His presence filled the space in a way that didn't feel overwhelming. If anything, it made the morning feel less heavy. As they worked, Mara found herself glancing at him from time to time, not because she was avoiding him, but because she was trying to understand why his presence felt so unexpectedly comforting. Colt must have sensed her glances because he spoke playfully. "You're thinking real hard over there." Mara looked away quickly, embarrassed. "Just not used to company." "No harm in that," Colt said lightly. "Company can be nice. Company can also be trouble. Depends on the day." "Which one am I?" she asked before thinking. "Nice," Colt said simply. "Very nice." Mara felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't reply. She didn't know how to handle kindness anymore. It had been too long since anyone spoke to her with softness. They continued working until the sun rose higher, warming the fields and brightening the world. When they finished, Colt wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled. "That was good work. You keep this place well." Mara shook her head. "I try, but it's harder now. Harder to do everything alone." "Doesn't have to stay that way," Colt said, his voice gentle but firm. Mara froze for a moment, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean—" Colt paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes life brings people to our path for a reason." She looked at him more deeply now, trying to understand what he meant. She felt a strange stirring inside her, a mixture of hope and fear. She wasn't ready for anything new. Her heart was still fragile, like glass that hadn't fully healed. But Colt's words didn't push her. They only opened a small door she hadn't touched in years. Mara changed the subject quickly, trying to steady her voice. "You must be hungry." Colt smiled gently, knowing she was avoiding the deeper meaning of his words. "A little, but I can eat on the road." "You can eat here," she said before she realized she was inviting him. If you want." "I'd be honored," he said simply. Inside the cabin, Mara prepared a simple breakfast, bread, eggs, and tea. She moved quietly, trying not to let her nervousness show. Colt sat at the small wooden table, watching her with polite eyes. "You've got a peaceful home," he said. "It doesn't feel peaceful anymore," she answered honestly. "Not since—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Colt understood. He didn't tell her to move on. He didn't say time heals all wounds. He just said, "Some hurts take longer, and that's all right." Mara looked down at the table, letting his words sink into her. No one had said something like that to her before. People always tried to hurry her healing, as if grief was something to finish quickly. After breakfast, Colt stood and lifted his bag. "I should get going. Daylight's wasting." Mara felt an unexpected twist in her stomach. She didn't want him to leave so soon, but she didn't know how to say it. "You're welcome to stay one more night if you need," she said softly, almost whispering. Colt paused. His eyes met hers with surprise, but warm surprise. "You sure, ma'am?" he asked gently. Mara nodded. Colt stayed. The day continued with small moments, quiet conversation, shared work, gentle silences that felt safe rather than awkward. Mara found herself opening up in tiny ways she didn't expect. She told him about her husband, about the farm, about the days that felt too long and the nights that felt too quiet. Colt listened with real attention. As the sun began to set, they found themselves sitting by the fire again. The flames glowed, creating a peaceful circle of warmth between them. It reminded Mara of the night before, but now the silence between them felt calmer, deeper, more familiar. She looked at Colt, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a widow speaking to a stranger. She felt like a woman who had found a moment of comfort she didn't expect. Colt broke the silence softly. "Thank you for today." Mara nodded. "Thank you for staying." The fire crackled, the wind softened, and the night wrapped around them like a gentle blanket. Without realizing it, Mara felt something inside her shift, something small but real. She was beginning to trust him, not fully, not completely, but enough for now. And sometimes, enough was a powerful beginning. The third day began with a soft gray sky, the kind that made everything quiet before the world fully woke up. Mara stepped outside as she usually did, expecting the same cold morning air and empty fields. But this morning felt different, not because the land had changed, but because there was someone else there who made the silence feel shared rather than lonely. Colt was already awake. Mara saw him near the fence line, checking the wooden posts for damage. His movements were steady, thoughtful. He wasn't just killing time. He was helping without being asked. Mara watched him for a moment before approaching. She wasn't used to someone waking earlier than her, especially not to work on her land. When Colt noticed her, he gave a polite nod. "Morning, ma'am," he said warmly. "I noticed this fence could use some fixing. Thought I'd get started." "You don't have to do that," Mara replied. "I know," Colt said with a gentle smile, "but it helps me too. Gives me something good to do with my hands." Mara didn't argue. Deep down, she appreciated it more than she could say. They worked together again, not because they planned it, but because the morning naturally took them there. While Mara fed the hens, Colt repaired a broken rail. When Mara collected firewood, Colt stacked it neatly by the shed. And through it all, there was a kind of quiet teamwork forming between them. Simple, honest, gentle. By midday, the sky cleared. Sunlight spread across the fields, warming the grass and softening the air. Mara and Colt stood near the barn, taking a break. Colt wiped the sweat from his forehead and leaned lightly against the wall. "You work harder than most men I've met," Mara said softly. Colt laughed. "You mean you've met a lot of lazy ones?" "Maybe," she said, a tiny smile forming on her lips. It surprised Colt. that smile. It wasn't big or loud, but it was real. And for a moment, he didn't look at Mara as a stranger. He saw her as a woman carrying a heavy past, slowly learning to breathe again. "What made you choose a life on the road?" Mara asked suddenly. Colt took a moment before answering. "Sometimes the road chooses you," he said quietly. "Life got a little too heavy where I was. Moving around made it easier to breathe." Mara understood more than he realized. She nodded gently. "Sometimes staying still hurts more." Colt looked at her with soft eyes, reading the truth she didn't speak. For a long moment, they said nothing. But the silence wasn't empty. It felt honest. Later, Mara prepared lunch, soup made with vegetables from her small garden. Colt helped set the table, though Mara insisted she could manage. "You don't have to do everything yourself," Colt said kindly. "I'm used to it," she replied. "That doesn't mean you should stay used to it." Mara paused. His words were simple, but they touched something deep inside her. She sat down slowly, unsure why her chest felt tight. They ate quietly at first. Mara was a light eater, but Colt was grateful for the warm food. After a few minutes, he spoke. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, how long has it been since your husband passed?" Mara's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Her eyes lowered. 2 years, she whispered. Colt immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry. You don't have to talk about it." "No," Mara said after a moment. "It's all right. I just don't talk about it much." "You can," Colt said gently, "if you ever feel like it." Mara took a slow breath. She hadn't spoken of her husband in a long time. Not because she didn't love him, but because talking about him made the loss feel sharp again. But Colt's presence felt safe, patient, steady. "My husband, Aaron," she began softly, "was a quiet man, hard-working, kind. He built this house with his own hands. He always wanted a peaceful life." Colt listened with full attention. He didn't interrupt or rush her. "He got sick," she continued. "And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't help him." Tears formed at the edges of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Colt nodded slowly. "Sometimes we carry blame that doesn't belong to us." Mara swallowed. "It still hurts. I thought the pain would slow with time. But sometimes it feels stronger." "That means you loved him deeply," Colt said gently. "Pain comes from love. That's all." Mara looked at him then, and something inside her softened. He wasn't just being kind. He understood. After lunch, Colt stepped outside to give Mara space. She stayed inside for a while, cleaning the table, washing dishes slowly, trying to steady her heart. When she finally stepped outside, she found Colt sitting near the fire pit, sharpening a small tool. He looked up when she approached. "You all right?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Thank you for listening." Colt gave a small, respectful nod. "Thank you for trusting me." The afternoon passed with light chores and slow conversations. They talked about little things, weather, animals, travel stories, nothing heavy. But every small conversation built a quiet connection between them, piece by piece. As evening arrived, Mara prepared a simple dinner. They ate outside near the fire as the sky turned orange and pink. The air grew cooler, but the fire kept them warm. Colt looked at the horizon thoughtfully. "I'll be honest, ma'am," he said softly. "I didn't plan on staying this long." "I know," Mara replied. "But I'm glad you did." Colt smiled gently. "Me too." The fire crackled softly between them. The night deepened. Mara wrapped her shawl around her shoulders as the wind grew stronger. Colt noticed and spoke quietly. "You cold?" "A little," she admitted. Without hesitation, Colt took off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. It was warm, carrying the faint scent of leather and dust. Comforting, familiar in a new way. "You didn't have to," she began. "I know," he said kindly, "but I wanted to." Mara held the coat around her. For the first time in a long time, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with fire. It was the warmth of being cared for. They sat in silence again, but this silence felt deeper, almost peaceful. The firelight danced across their faces, softening the shadows and highlighting the quiet connection growing between them. Mara looked down at her hands, uncertain of the emotions forming inside her. She wasn't ready for anything new. She wasn't even sure what she wanted. But she knew she didn't want this night to end quickly. Colt spoke softly, as if reading her thoughts. "You've been alone a long time." "Yes," she whispered. "You don't have to stay alone forever," he said gently. Mara's breath caught slightly. She didn't know what to say. Colt wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't promising anything. He was simply reminding her that life could still hold new chapters, even for someone who thought her story had already ended. The fire crackled louder as the wind shifted. Mara watched the flames, her heart slowly warming in a way she had forgotten was possible. She didn't know where this path would lead. She didn't know what tomorrow held. But for tonight, under the quiet firelight, she wasn't alone. And that small truth was enough to change everything. The fourth morning arrived quietly, with a soft golden light spilling over the field. The air smelled fresh, like the earth had taken a deep breath during the night. Mara stepped outside, expecting to see Colt by the fence or helping with morning chores, but he wasn't there. Her heart gave a small, unexpected ache. She didn't know why she felt disappointed. He was a traveler, always moving, always going someplace new. Maybe he had already left. Maybe he had decided it was time to continue his journey. She walked toward the shed slowly, trying not to let her worry show, even though no one was there to see it. When she reached the shed, the door opened from the inside. Colt stepped out, stretching his arms, his hair a little messy but his expression calm. "Morning, ma'am." He greeted her with a warm smile. Mara released a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "Morning," she replied, quieter than she intended. Colt noticed the relief on her face, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he walked toward the trough and started filling it with water for his horse. Mara stood nearby, unsure whether she should speak or stay silent. "Thought you might have left," she finally said. Colt paused and looked at her. "Left without saying goodbye? I wouldn't do that." Mara felt a gentle warmth grow inside her chest. She nodded slightly, feeling a small, unexpected peace settle over her. They spent the morning working together again, Mara tending the garden while Colt repaired a broken wheel on an old cart. He worked with steady hands, focused and calm, as if he belonged there. At one point, Mara paused to watch him. She didn't mean to stare, but something about the way he moved, the patience, the quiet strength, made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. "You're thinking hard again," Colt said with a smile, noticing her gaze. Mara looked away, embarrassed. "I was just watching how easily you handle things." "Years of practice," he said lightly. "Life teaches you if you pay attention." Mara nodded, though she wasn't thinking about work anymore. She was thinking about how quickly Colt had become part of her days, how naturally he fit into the quiet corners of her world. By midday, they took a break. Mara made tea and they sat outside under the shade of a tree. A gentle wind moved through the leaves, creating a soft, rustling sound. Colt took a sip of tea. "You make a good cup," he said. "It's just simple tea." "Sometimes simple is best." Mara looked down, smiling faintly. She wasn't used to compliments, not anymore. Colt watched her carefully. You smile more now, he said softly. Her smile faded into surprise. No, I don't. Yes, Colt said gently. You do. It's nice to see. Mara didn't know how to respond. She felt a mix of emotions, warmth, fear, confusion. After all these years, she had trained herself not to expect anything from life. But now, with Colt around, small pieces of her old self were waking up again. She set her cup down. You make things feel different. Bad different? Colt asked, though his voice was playful. Mara shook her head. No, just unexpected. Colt nodded slowly, understanding more than she said aloud. After a moment of silence, Colt spoke again. Mara, can I ask you something? She looked up. Yes. Do you ever think about starting again? I mean, living, not just surviving. Mara froze. The question was gentle, but it touched the most fragile place inside her heart. I don't know how, she said honestly. There's no one right way, Colt replied softly. You just take one small step, then another. But what if I fall again? Mara whispered. Colt looked at her with steady eyes. Then someone will help you stand. No one needs to stand alone forever. Mara's throat tightened. She looked away, blinking back the sting of emotion. Colt didn't push her to speak. He simply sat with her, letting the quiet carry the weight of her feelings. Later, they returned to the field. The sun climbed higher, warming the land. Mara carried a bucket of water while Colt worked on repairing a fence gate. When Mara approached, Colt straightened up. You're working too hard, he said softly. Let me take that. I can handle it, she replied. I know you can. But you don't have to handle everything alone. He gently took the bucket from her hands, not forcefully, but with a kind respect that made her heart soften. As the afternoon passed, clouds gathered across the sky. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of approaching rain. We should cover the tools, Colt said. Storm's coming. Mara nodded. They worked together quickly, storing equipment in the barn and securing anything that could blow away. By the time the first raindrops fell, they were both standing at the barn entrance, watching the sky darken. The rain came fast, heavy, steady, drumming across the roof. The air grew cool, and the world outside blurred into moving gray. Mara stepped deeper into the barn, away from the wind. Colt followed, closing the doors halfway to keep the rain out. For a moment, they stood together in the dim light, the sound of the storm surrounding them. It's been a long time since I've been stuck inside during a storm, Mara said softly. Colt smiled faintly. Storms can be loud, but they can also be peaceful. She nodded. Sometimes they make me feel small. Sometimes they make you feel safe, Colt replied, like the world is washing itself clean. Mara looked at him, wondering how someone could carry so much gentleness in his voice. Colt noticed her gaze and spoke quietly. You're stronger than you think, Mara. She swallowed, unsure how to respond. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about feeling brave all the time. Sometimes it's just getting up every morning, keeping your home, keeping your heart open, even when it hurts. Mara's breath trembled softly. She didn't know how Colt saw so deeply into her, but his words felt like warm hands holding the broken pieces inside her. As the storm continued, Colt found a few blankets stacked in the barn. He placed one gently around Mara's shoulders. You'll get cold, he said. What about you? She asked. I'll be all right. Mara shook her head and placed another blanket over his shoulders. They stood close enough to share warmth, but not too close. Just enough to feel the comfort of another human presence. Outside, thunder rumbled softly. Inside, the air felt still, almost calm. Colt, Mara whispered, how long will you stay? He looked at her, really looked. I don't know. he said honestly. But I'm not in a hurry to leave. Mara felt something shift inside her, a fear mixed with hope, a question she didn't know how to ask, a feeling she wasn't ready to name. She didn't ask him to stay forever. She didn't ask him to promise anything. But she said softly, "I'm glad you're here." Colt's expression warmed. "I'm glad, too." The storm outside softened into gentle rain, but the world inside the barn felt strangely bright. Not from light, but from something deeper, something warm and new. Mara didn't know where life was leading her. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing for certain. For the first time in a very long time, her heart was beginning to wake up again. He woke up before sunrise that morning, when the sky was still a soft shade of gray, and everything around the small cabin was quiet. The fire from last night had turned into faint orange ashes, and for a moment, the cowboy sat there, feeling the silence settle on his shoulders. The widow was still sleeping inside, and he didn't want to disturb her. She had finally slept peacefully after many nights of struggle, worry, and hidden fear. He knew rest was the best gift she could get right now. The cowboy stood up slowly, dusting the dirt from his hands, and walked a few steps away from the cabin. The open land stretched far into the distance, and the breeze carried the smell of fresh morning grass. He looked at the rising sun and wondered how life had changed so much in such a short time. He had been a traveler, someone who never stayed long in any place, but now he found himself thinking about building a life in this small town. It felt strange, but it also felt right. Inside the cabin, the widow opened her eyes. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, but then she remembered the events of the past days. She remembered how she had cried, how she had told the cowboy things she had never said aloud, and how she had finally felt understood. A calmness washed over her, something she had not felt since her husband died. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, and realized that the cowboy wasn't inside. A spark of worry rushed through her, not because she feared danger, but because she feared being alone again. She stepped outside, and there he was, standing with his hat in his hand, looking at the sunrise like it had something to tell him. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "You're up early," he said softly. "I woke up and didn't see you," she replied with a small smile. "For a moment I thought you left." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I'm still here." There was something warm about the way he said that, and it settled deep inside her heart. They sat on a wooden step outside the cabin. No words were needed at first. The air was cool, the birds were just starting to sing, and the quiet moment between them felt comforting. After a long pause, the widow finally spoke. "I feel different today," she said. "Lighter. I never thought I would feel this again." He looked at her. "You've carried a lot for a long time." She nodded. "Yes, but yesterday, you helped me face something I was running from." The cowboy didn't answer immediately. He didn't like taking credit for someone else's strength. "You did the hard part," he said. "I just listened." But she shook her head gently. "Sometimes that's all a person needs." A breeze swept through, lifting a strand of her hair across her cheek. He reached out carefully and tucked it behind her ear. Not in a romantic way, but in a quiet, gentle, respectful gesture that spoke more than words. She didn't pull away. For a moment she closed her eyes, letting herself feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in months. Later that day, the town began to wake up. People moved around, shops opened, and the sound of horses and wagons echoed through the dusty street. The widow and the cowboy walked together side by side. Some villagers looked at them with curiosity, not with judgment, but with interest. Everyone knew the widow's struggles. Everyone had watched her carry pain silently. And now she was smiling again. Not a loud or excited smile, but a soft and real one. They went to the small market to buy supplies. The old storekeeper raised his eyebrows when he saw the cowboy. "You're still in town?" he asked. The cowboy glanced at the widow before replying. "For now." "For now, huh?" the storekeeper said with a knowing smile. "Sometimes people find a reason to stay." The widow felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she picked up a small bag of flour and held it close. As they left the store, a young boy ran up to them. Miss, the boy said breathlessly. "My mother said your bread last week was the best she's had. She wondered if you would bake again for the market." The widow froze. She hadn't baked bread for the market in months. After her husband passed, she lost the energy and heart for it. But hearing that someone remembered, someone cared, it meant something. The cowboy noticed the way she hid a soft smile. "Maybe you should," he said quietly. Maybe," she replied, unsure but hopeful. The rest of the day passed with small moments like these, moments where she rediscovered the simple parts of life she had forgotten, moments where she felt stronger than before. And every time she looked beside her, the cowboy was there, not pushing her, not forcing her to move forward, but walking with her, step by step. By evening, they returned to the cabin. She began preparing a small meal, and he helped by gathering firewood. It felt almost like a quiet partnership. A natural rhythm had formed between them, without either of them planning it. When the food was ready, they sat together at the small table. The warm light from the fire made the room glow softly. "I want to rebuild my bakery," the widow said suddenly. "Not like before, not big, just something small, for the people here, for myself." The cowboy smiled. "I think that's a good plan." She looked at him carefully. "Would you stay long enough to see it?" He leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment. "I've been traveling most of my life. Never stayed anywhere too long. But," he looked at her with sincerity, "maybe it's time for that to change." Her breath caught. She didn't need promises. She didn't need dramatic declarations. She just needed someone who meant what they said, and he did. They finished the meal in peaceful silence. Later, they stepped outside again. The night sky was clear, filled with stars. The wind was gentle, and the firelight flickered between them. The widow stood close to the flames, letting their warmth touch her face. "I used to love nights like this," she said. "But after everything that happened, I stopped noticing how beautiful they are." "You're seeing them again now," the cowboy replied. "Yes," she said softly, "because I'm not standing alone anymore." He looked at her, really looked at her, not with pity, not with expectation, but with deep respect for everything she had survived. She stepped a little closer. "You've helped me more than you know." "I'm glad," he said, "but remember, ma'am, the strength was always yours." Her eyes glistened, not from sadness this time, but from gratitude. The fire crackled, filling the silence between them. She took a long breath, letting go of the last pieces of heaviness that held her back. And for the first time since her husband's death, she felt a sense of future, not the past, not the pain, but the possibility of something new, maybe a new friendship, maybe a new chapter, maybe hope. The cowboy placed his hat on the ground and sat near the fire. She sat beside him. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. The warmth of the flames, the quiet of the night, and the comfort of being understood were enough. After a long pause, she finally whispered, "It still hurts sometimes, but it doesn't stop me anymore." The cowboy turned to her with a soft nod. "That's what healing looks like." She smiled gently. "And I want more of life now. I want to live again." He smiled back, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Then we'll take it one step at a time." They stayed there under the stars, side by side, the firelight dancing across their faces. Two people, both marked by their own pasts, both finding something new in each other: strength, comfort, and the quiet courage to keep moving forward. And as the night wrapped around them, the widow finally felt something she thought she had lost forever: peace, a new beginning, and hope for tomorrow.